We often think of ancient Rome as masters of concrete and aqueducts, but did you know that Romans were also pioneers in military engineering? Today we'll be looking at three lost technologies of the Roman army and how they helped Rome dominate their enemies both on the battlefield and in the boardroom. These three technologies are military roads, siege engines, and fortified camps. The first two can be thought of as infrastructure. They either directly enable troops to do their job or support them while they're doing their job. Infrastructure is usually invisible when it does its job correctly. That's why most people pass by a highway every day without appreciating the hundreds of thousands of engineers and construction workers who made it possible. Similarly, military roads, called Via Militare in Latin, facilitated the rapid movement of troops over long distances. These roads allowed the Roman army to be deployed where it was needed most, quickly. Today, most people only know about Roman roads because of their incredible aqueducts and milestones, but the real workhorse of Roman road building was the military way. This is an old photo of Hadrian's Wall. Most of the wall is ruined, but if you look closely, you can see a paved road running right under it. That road is the Via Militare. It was built by the Second Legion during the reign of Augustus and ran from Deva Victrix, the capital of Roman Britain, all the way to Sedudunum, the fort near Wallsend on the River Tyne. It was used by the legions stationed in Britain for everything from patrolling the wall to suppressing rebellions in the province. To put it simply, it was the military road that kept Britannia under control. The Romans built their military roads with durability in mind. They didn't want to have to fix them every few years, so they took the time to build them properly. Their typical design consisted of 3 layers. The bottom layer was a foundation made of large rocks. The middle layer was a layer of small stones or concrete. And the top layer was a layer of small stones or paving bricks. This design made the roads extremely durable and able to withstand the weight of heavy traffic. In fact, many Roman roads are still in use today, more than 2,000 years later. But the Romans didn't just build their roads to last. They also built them to be as straight as possible. This made it easier to travel long distances quickly. But it also had the benefit of allowing troops to see for miles in all directions. This made it easier to spot enemy forces and gave troops more time to prepare for battle. The second piece of Roman infrastructure was siege engines. In ancient warfare, there were 3 main ways to win battles. There was brute force, clever tactics, and machines that gave you an advantage. Siege engines were the machines of ancient warfare. Like modern tanks, siege engines were designed to do one thing: kill people. And like modern tanks, they came in a wide variety of shapes and sizes. But the Romans were especially fond of 2 types of siege engines, ballista and helepolis. Ballista were basically giant crossbows. They could shoot arrows that were as big as a man's torso. The Romans used these weapons to great effect during the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. The Roman general Titus used ballista to bombard the city walls, eventually causing them to collapse. This allowed the Romans to enter the city and put it to the sword. Helepolis, on the other hand, were towering battering rams. They were usually made of 2 connected towers, one on top of the other. The lower tower was used to house the crew of the engine. The upper tower was used to house the battering ram itself. The battering ram would then be lowered and used to smash into the gates of the city. The Romans used catapults to great effect during the siege of Masada in 73–74 CE. The Roman general Flavius Silva used catapults to batter down the walls of the fortress, allowing his troops to enter and defeat the Jewish rebels. The third technology we'll be discussing today is fortified camps. Camps were a critical part of any ancient army's logistics. Camps provided troops with a place to rest and recuperate. They also provided a place for troops to store their supplies. In other words, camps were basically the home base of the ancient army. And like any good home, the camp needed to be defended. The Romans were well aware of this, and they designed their camps with defense in mind. Roman camps were usually built in a rectangular shape. This made it easier to defend them with minimal manpower. The camps were also surrounded by a ditch and a palisade. The ditch served as a moat, preventing the enemy from getting too close to the camp. The palisade served as a wall, preventing the enemy from scaling the ditch and attacking the camp head-on. In addition to these defensive measures, Roman camps were also designed to be as modular as possible. This meant that they could be easily adapted to different terrains and situations. For example, the camps could be expanded or contracted as needed. They could also be easily moved if the situation called for it. Nowhere is the importance of fortified camps more evident than in the siege of Masada. Masada was a fortress located in the Judean desert. Between 66 and 73 CE, it was the site of a famous siege between the Roman Empire and Jewish rebels. The Jewish rebels chose Masada as their final stand because it was virtually impregnable. The fortress was surrounded by a high stone wall and was accessible only through a single narrow entrance. This entrance was protected by a large gate, which was in turn protected by 2 towers. Each tower was manned by 20 soldiers, giving a total of 40 soldiers to guard the gate. In addition to the gate, the fortress was also protected by a deep moat. This moat was filled with water from a nearby spring, making it impossible to cross without being seen. When the Romans arrived at Masada, they knew that they were in for a tough fight. The Romans began by building 3 camps around the fortress. Each camp was capable of housing 6,000 men. The camps were connected by a series of roads, which allowed the Romans to bring up supplies and reinforcements. The Romans also built a road leading to the top of the fortress. This road was used to bring up siege engines and other equipment. The siege lasted for several months, and during that time, the Romans tried everything to break the Jewish resistance. They bombarded the fortress with siege engines. They tried to undermine the walls. But the Jewish rebels held firm. Eventually, the Romans resorted to building a ramp up to the fortress wall. This ramp allowed the Romans to bring their siege engines close enough to the wall to bombard it with arrows and stones. Eventually, the wall was breached and the Romans entered the fortress. All of the Jewish rebels committed mass suicide rather than surrender. The siege of Masada was a testament to the power of fortified camps. Without their camps, the Romans would not have been able to lay siege to Masada. The camps provided the Romans with the logistical support they needed to sustain their troops for the long siege. They also provided the Romans with a safe haven from the Jewish rebels. If the Roman troops had not had their camps, they would have been vulnerable to attack by the Jewish rebels. The camps also provided the Romans with the infrastructure they needed to launch their siege. The siege engines and other equipment that the Romans used to bombard the fortress would not have been effective if they had not had their camps. The camps also allowed the Romans to bring up reinforcements and supplies. If the Romans had not been able to do this, their troops would have become exhausted and demoralized, and the siege would have failed. So there you have it, 3 lost technologies of the Roman army. Military roads, siege engines, and fortified camps. These technologies allowed the Romans to dominate their enemies on the battlefield and in the boardroom, so next time you're out and about, take a moment to appreciate the Romans and their contributions to our world. Thanks for watching.